How y'all doing? We're going to go ahead and start here our panel on Can CPAC Save Latin America? Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for everybody coming in and joining us today. So I heard somebody important is speaking later today. But I know why you're really at CPAC. And you're here to see the two Eduardos. One Eduardo's late, and he's actually
the Mexican Eduardo is late, not the Brazilian.
And that's an accomplishment for Mexico to be later than Brazil. I think that is quite an accomplishment. No, in all seriousness, I think CPAC has done a tremendous amount of work in Latin America. They've gone to Brazil. I know they've had conversations with Colombia. They've had conversations with Central America. CPAC's all over the world. But I'm going to say something to my good friend Dan Schneider and Matt Schlapp. The first step for CPAC to saving Latin America is to put us on the main stage and to take us out of the breakout sessions. And essentially what we're going to talk about today, this is going to be a very informal conversation, and we'll bring Eduardo Verástegui in once he arrives. But everybody okay? We're going to give you essentially a tour de jour of Latin America for those that aren't familiar with the region. And then I want to talk to our good Congressman, Mark Green, who is one of the champions and leaders of the U.S. Congress that's paying attention not only to Latin America, but to the threats that are coming from other parts of the world that are in Latin America that we're not addressing. But I want to begin this conversation, which I think is a 101 conversation, a 101 question for your everyday American that's in Idaho, that's in Iowa, that may not know all the ins and outs of Latin America. And I'm going to start this question with my good friend Eduardo Bolsonaro. Why should the United States care about Latin America? Why should they put Latin America more important than, say, the headaches in the Middle East or Russia invading Ukraine or all the other things that we're seeing around the world?
I think this issue is much more than only being isolated in the world. For example, something that you suffer here in the United States is the illegal immigration. About 5 million of Venezuelans, only to talk about Venezuelans and not about other countries, they run away from Venezuela. And it means that we are suffering, mainly in Colombia, with the biggest immigrant crisis ever in the history of Latin America. But now let's talk about Brazil. We are like 210 million people living there. If we have the same crisis of Venezuela, it means that 30 million Brazilians will be spread all over the region. So, for sure, this is something that will affect you. And I will tell you, none of the Brazilians would move abroad of their houses. We really would love to live in Brazil. But with socialism, as you can see in Venezuela, for example, Caracas became the most dangerous place to live in 2016. Forget about Syria, Kabul, Afghanistan. Most dangerous place on earth, most dangerous capital on earth is Caracas. And more than that, they are suffering with this slavery. But still like that, you have new presidents as President Boric, Ms. Carla Zambelli, my friend from Congress here. Mr. Boric, the new president of Chile, Mark Green, he has a lot of tweets saying good things about Maduro, about the Bolivarian revolution, and all of that. And in the same way, Lula da Silva in Brazil. So what we are doing here is spreading the truth about the risks that not only we are suffering down there in South America, but things that can reflect here in the US. I think this is the main issue.
And that's an incredible number that you threw out, Eduardo. People don't realize this, but Venezuela is the second largest mass migration in the world. It'll surpass Syria this year. It's 6 million Venezuelans that have left that country since 2014. Only second to Syria, but that number will grow. But that number will be pale in comparison if a socialist were to take power in Brazil and do the same kind of economic disaster that we know that socialists will do. I didn't think Eduardo needed an introduction, so I forgot to introduce Eduardo. Well, the two Eduardos now, but Eduardo Bolsonaro, this is the most impressive, I think, note of Eduardo Bolsonaro, who has an impressive resume. But he's the Brazilian congressman with the most amounts of votes in the history of Brazil. Highest elected congressman. And Eduardo Bolsonaro's leadership in Brazil has transcended into foreign policy, international defense, and very important issues. So thank you, Eduardo, for everything that you're doing.
I'm the former chairman of the Foreign Affairs and National Defense Committee, and that is something that we really care about there.
Okay. And what I also want to do real quick, because this is a real all-star lineup of people that we're going to be able to talk to. There is one person that really should be on this panel, and I want to give a good greeting to her because she is a good friend of most of the folks here on the panel, and she is a senator from Colombia, Senator Maria Fernanda Cabal, who is going to be running for re-election on March 13th, and is the new leader of the conservative movement in Colombia. Everyone give me a round of applause for Senator Maria Fernanda Cabal.
What is her sister?
Yes, and her sister's in the audience. For those, there you go. Now, I want to pivot over to Spain, because Latin America has a rich culture and a rich history that includes Spain. It's the bridge of our transatlantic relationship from the New World to Europe. And Hermann Tertsch, who's a parliamentarian for the European Parliament, he's a member of the most prominent conservative political party in Spain, which is the Vox political party, which is new, but has essentially grown tremendously and thankfully, because Spain was going in the wrong direction. Hermann, talk to us about the threats that exist on the other side of the world, where everyone in the news is talking about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We all know about China's encroachment throughout the entire world with the pandemic, the disinformation, and obviously there's always Iran. Hermann, tell us about how these threats that your European counterparts in the parliament are constantly thinking about, and how those threats are impacting us inside the Western Hemisphere.
Well, hello to everybody. Thank you. The thing is, the danger we are suffering the same danger as you are suffering here, and we have it's an illness that we are suffering since 50 years. We have been continuously retreating the conservative forces in front of a progressive, leftist, communist organization which has been increasingly organized after the fall of the war, paradoxically, when people thought that the threat, Fukuyama and so on, would all be Democrats, and the threat had passed, and China would become, through capitalism, would become democratic, and so on, and tolerant. And so the opposite was the case. The opposite was the case. We have seen how the reorganization of the communist forces, first under Castro and Lula, they founded the Foro de Sao Paulo. It was then financed by Hugo Chavez with the oil in the first years, and now it's financed by all the cartels of the cocaine, and so it's an enormously dangerous force that is subverting, and it is now tearing down the institutions, the most solid institutions in Chile, in Peru. We are seeing it advance. The danger is imminent in Colombia, the Jew in Brazil. It could come back. So they would have really, the whole South America would be in the hands of a big multinational mafia, which would be communist in profound connection with China and Russia and Hezbollah and Iran, and it would be financed mainly by an enormous region which would be producing cocaine for the Western world, for a weak Western world, undecided and weak Western world. I mean, the image is absolutely appalling. So we from Spain, we saw in Spain that we were orphans of a real conservative party, because the People's Party, the traditional center-right party, they were doing leftist politics. I mean, they were getting the conservative votes, then for traducing it into a leftist policy. We said it's enough. Vox was created, and Vox is rapidly growing since 4 years. Now we are the second force in the polls. We are the third in the parliament, the second in the polls, and we want, and we have the goal to be soon the first force. We are 2 points in distance of the Socialist Party, of the leading Socialist Party. We want to be the first force, and we want to change really the way of doing politics in Europe. And we have many allies in Europe, and we have created a group, a conservative group of action from the European Parliament of all the groups that are in the ECR, all the parties, European parties, for acting in Latin America, creating network for defending the values, the conservative values, and acting against this terror offensive tsunami of the criminal and communist movement that we are seeing.
Oh, absolutely. And for those that don't know, and Herman's being very modest, because Herman and I were in Bogota recently, about a week ago, and one of the things that the foundation that's connected to the political party Vox, Fundación Disenso, is doing is they're creating something called the Foro Madrid. And what the Foro Madrid is doing is unifying the Latin American right. It took Spain to actually get our house in order in Latin America, but they're unifying the Latin American right so that they can stop this socialist wave that's actually resurging in Latin America that we've seen in elections in Peru, in Chile, in Honduras, and elsewhere. And at the conference in Bogota, we were at a hotel, a Metro Hotel in Bogota, the equivalent of the Antifa of Colombia came to the conference and essentially just destroyed the hotel. They threw, not rocks, they threw boulders at the hotel, broke all the entire front window, and Herman did something very politically savvy. He picked up one of these rocks and he said, you know what? These are the arguments of the left. This is the arguments of the left. This is all they got. They got violence, they got disorder, because they can't engage in intellectual ideas. And Herman, thank you for everything you guys are doing in Vox, in Foro Madrid, in La Carta Madrid, to help unify Latin America. With that, I'm going to turn to our fellow congressman from Tennessee, also someone that I believe we share the same blood and the same mud, both veterans of the Iraq War. Congressman Mark Green is also an Army Ranger and was one of the, I don't believe the first or only, that interrogated Saddam Hussein after he was captured inside Iraq, but since has been leading U.S. Congress foreign policy issues, national defense issues, and most importantly is the ranking member of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you, Mark, for being here, Congressman Green. And what I want to ask you, Congressman, I know you've done a lot of efforts in Congress to help stop this socialist wave, to help build U.S.-Latin American relations, but to kind of want to go back to the question that I asked Eduardo. In Congress, why isn't Latin America get more attention? Why isn't it a bigger priority with everything that we've seen in the border and drugs? Why isn't it a bigger priority within your fellow congressmen on the House of Representatives and even in the Senate?
Well, thanks for having me on the panel. I really appreciate it. Anytime I get to hang out with Eduardo Bolsonaro is a good day. So it's good to see you, Eduardo. Both Eduardos. Brother, how are you? Good to see you. I got to tell a quick story about Eduardo. We were in Brazil, and he was showing me around one of the buildings, and we saw a couple of people, maybe 2 or 3 people out on the street. And he says, "Come, let's go say hi to them." And as soon as we got there, 200 people show up yelling "Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro." It was great.
This is the real pool.
Yeah. This is critically important to the United States. Let me say that first before I answer your question as to why it's not getting more attention than it is. Some of the reasons Eduardo mentioned, but freedom gets you prosperity, and prosperity gets you security. And that's really what it is. And that security is important for both Latin America and North America, the United States. Why is Congress not doing more than it should, or more than it can, as much as it should? It's because right now, those who are in control in Congress don't have a problem with Marxism. Right. In our own country right now, we are pushing back against the Marxist left, who want centralized control of our economy because they think they're smarter than the markets. They think they're smarter than the people. And so they think they have to seize control of power and control the forces of the economy. They are Marxists. And so when you ask them to speak up against, the dictatorship in Cuba or the dictatorship of Maduro, a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, they ignore it. When we talk about China's slithering into Latin America, offering the candy of money for the strings of their totalitarianism. The left in America turns a blind eye because they are Marxists themselves. So if you're asking why, they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to bring light to the idea that socialism leads to what you have in Maduro and what you have in Diaz-Canel. And so that's why we, few Republicans, are yelling at the top of our voice while the media is focused on the wrong stuff and authoritarianism is advancing across the globe. Whether it's in Ukraine or whether it's Cuba or Cubazuela metastasizing throughout Latin America. And so that's why you're being here, the men on this panel, the women in governments throughout Latin America who are standing up for freedom and for the people are so important. And that's why CPAC is so important. I was there at the CPAC in Brazil. And this is about freedom. This is about freedom. And the left wants authoritarianism.
Very good. Very well said. So in Latin America, one of the things that I think China doesn't understand, for sure Iran doesn't understand, and Russia struggles with, is the fact that we have a comparative advantage in the United States. We are connected to Latin America in more ways than just trade agreements or security cooperation. We're connected through culture. We're connected through identity. We're connected through values. Eduardo, I want to talk to you. Eduardo Verástegui is your girlfriend's favorite soap opera star. I want to talk, Eduardo, about values. You have done a tremendous effort at championing pro-life causes. I believe you started in one of the most important pro-life movies, Bella, in Mexico. Being from Mexico, being here in the United States, being appointed by President Trump for being on the Advisory Commission of Hispanic Prosperity, how do you see our values connection between Americans, United States, and other Americans, which are Mexican, Latin Americans, South Americans? How do you see our values transcending differences that are happening in Congress or in policies or among politicians?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me in this panel. I'm not a politician. You said it right, I'm an actor. And somebody told me in Mexico, well, it's time to act. It's time to act with values. You know, we are living a horror film, if we were going to use the filmmaking language in our country, in Mexico. We are living a horror film. And everybody wants to end this film because we want a love story, where everyone is a lead actor, where everyone is going to be acting with values, with virtues, with honesty, patience, loving more, judging less. And I remember when I did my first soap opera many years ago, people stopped me in the streets and they asked me, "Are you the guy from Soñadores?" I said, "Yes." "Well, you look a lot younger on TV." Well, I did that 25 years ago, of course. You know, I was younger, but you know, they repeat those shows through Univision forever, and they think that you have to remain the same, right? But it's not, you know, hopefully, but no, that's not the case. But anyway, this is an important story because it has to do with values. And I did this show many years ago, and I played this role that, you know, was involved with drugs, and this is a very successful, you know, young guy who lost his parents, and then he was hanging out with the wrong people. Next thing you know, he was doing other drugs. You know, even though 9 months later, he changed his life. I was one day in Miami, and somebody from Venezuela told me, "Are you the guy from Soñadores?" "Yes." "Wow, you know, man, I watch your show every day, and you're amazing, and I love your character." And my ego as an actor, of course, was going up. "Oh, thank you, well, thank you. You know, I started doing drugs because of your character."
Oh.
And that really touched my heart in a very profound way. Because it was until then when I realized how much media influenced how people think. The average percentage in America of parents having meaningful conversation with their children every day, the time is from 3 to 6 minutes a day. But in front of the media, more than 9 hours a day. So we know who is educating our young people. It's not parents. You guys are the exception of the rule. But it's not parents, not churches, not schools. It's the media. Now, there's nothing wrong with the media. The media is just a powerful tool. You know, it's how you use it what makes the difference. You know, if you use it, you know, in a positive way, you can change the world. Art has the power to change the world for the better, or has the power to poison the minds of the youth. And that's what is happening right now. I'm from Mexico. I was traveling my country 2 years ago with the movie Unplanned, sending a powerful message, a pro-life message. That pro-life doesn't mean only to take care and to protect the unborn. That's the priority. But we don't stop there. Pro-life means to be taking care of those children who are living in the streets. Pro-life means to take care of those young teenagers who are suffering from drug addiction. We need to be there. Pro-life means to be helping those who were false accused and they're in prison and they don't know how to come out because, you know, they don't know and they don't have the means. Pro-life means to be with those mothers who were abandoned by their husbands. Pro-life means to be in front of those who are sick and they're in hospital and they don't have the means to take care of themselves. So when we started doing this, sending this message all over Mexico, I learned a lot of things. First of all, I learned good news and bad news. The good news is we are the majority. The majority of Mexicans stand for values. People of faith who wants freedom. What is the bad news? We are not well organized. We're not articulated. So in Mexico we say, hace más ruido un árbol que cae que un bosque que florece. There is more noise caused by a tree that falls than a forest that is growing. So of course, the perception sometimes because of the media, most of the media is owned by the left. And the perception is like they're the majority, but it's not true. They're not the majority. And it's very unfair that we, a country that is pro-life, pro-family, pro-traditional values, we are not representing the government the right way. So there's something is missing, and that's why we created this movement in Mexico called Movimiento Viva México, which is very similar to the Movimiento Vive Vox in Spain. You know, it's the same. And CPAC is the answer because CPAC somehow is bringing every single movement around the world who share the values together to fight for the same enemy. We stand here for freedom, and I'm happy to announce that in September 2nd and 3rd, we will have the first CPAC ever in Mexico. It's going to be one more time. And you're all invited. You're all invited. I was in CPAC Brazil. We had the best time with mi tocayo Eduardo. And now it's time for Mexico. And I want to bring the best leaders, the best speakers around the world who share our values. So together we can end this nightmare that it's the enemy of freedom.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we're all going to be at CPAC Mexico. I can tell you this week. Absolutely. So you talked about the media, Eduardo, and I think this is something that our other friend Eduardo knows a lot about: the press, fake news. So if you think in the United States we have it bad with the media, you have no idea how they have it in Brazil. There's no Fox News in Brazil.
No.
So in Brazil,
You have cell phones, that's it.
yeah, cell phones, YouTube.
Come on, dropping pens not that bad.
So here's the thing. So like, I missed the Reagan dinner last night, and someone asked me, Joseph, why did you miss the dinner? I said, well, I had to go on CNN Español. They're like, Joseph, why did you go on CNN Español? I said, well, because there is nothing else. If you want to get the message out, a conservative message about anything, about values, about foreign policy, about national defense, there's nowhere to go other than left media. Eduardo, yeah, correct. But Eduardo, tell us about the situation of the media, because this drove me crazy during the pandemic. Right? Everybody on the news were saying that President Bolsonaro, Brazil, is the worst case in Latin America when it comes to COVID. First it was because of the spread of the infection, then it was the vaccine.
He's against the black, the woman, the
Everything.
poor, the foreigner.
But
I don't know if you ever listened about someone that is like that here in the US. Maybe Trump?
But here's the thing, right? It was simple statistics, right? Brazil is a 200 million plus, 230 million population. You can't compare that to Costa Rica. And if you adjust per population, Brazil is not the worst case of the pandemic in Latin America.
Sure not.
But tell us about how the media is trying to distort the narratives in Brazil, especially in this important year in Brazil, which is an election year.
Yep. The problem in Brazil is because we elected a conservative president without none of a conservative infrastructure. For example, if you compare, and sometimes people were using to compare, Mr. Green, Bolsonaro and Trump. They say that Bolsonaro is the Trump from the tropics. All right. But here you have a Republican Party. Jair Bolsonaro, like 1 or 2 months ago, he doesn't even had a party to him, conservative party. Here you have Fox News, O1, and other social media and all of that. In Brazil, you have none. Now it's growing up again, Jovem Pan, as Paulo Figueiredo just told here. That's true. But it's still to fill. We could have much more than that. In the universities, forget about that. If you wear a Bolsonaro t-shirt and goes into some of the federal universities, people is going to punch you. And you have a bunch of videos on YouTube showing that. You can't even, it's not necessary, trust me, go for YouTube and you'll find that easily. The churches, they are all the time trying to get into the churches. Unions, all dominated by the left. So this is the problem that we have in Brazil. And for sure, the mainstream media, they are there doing all of the fake news. They accuse us to do the fake news, but they do the real lies. And that's why you have independent channels growing up in Brazil quickly. Like Jovem Pan, I think it's the most viewed TV channel on the web. Am I wrong?
And it's beating CNN on cable already.
Yeah, now just started on the cable TV. So there is a lack of people that want other kind of information, because it's clearly that the mainstream media, they do not inform you anymore. They try to manipulate you. And this is the kind of media that goes abroad of Brazil. That's why sometimes you don't have even the right information outside in US or Europe, and you feed the news there with fake news media. We are fighting back against that. That's why I say that we need more and more cell phones, and we need a free internet. The Supreme Court in Brazil, usually before 2018, the elections, they said that Bolsonaro is a dictator, he's going to do all the bad things. But who arrested a representative as me in Brazil was the Supreme Court. Supreme Court closed one of the main channels in internet that we had, which is the Tertsch, and also arrested journalists. And the crazy thing that when they arrest a right-wing journalist, the left-wing media, they say that he's not a journalist, he's a blogger, you know? And now one of these guys, he's living here in the US. Kind of, it's not a refugee, the right word, it's the asilado. Asili. He's almost in this situation. Because the Supreme Court, one of the judges is trying to arrest him because he was speaking bad words and criticizing the Supreme Court. This is the kind of people that say that Bolsonaro is a dictator. Can you imagine that? You close, and also they arrested a leader of a party, Roberto Jefferson. Arrested a representative, Daniel Silveira. Sent to the jail a journalist, Osvaldo Eustáquio, and trying to arrest Alan dos Santos. So all of this that I'm talking, very probably here in the US, you don't know about that. When I came here in my first CPAC and I had the chance to talk in the main stage, I talked about the stab that my father suffered in the 2018 campaign. And it was a stab that was done by a left-wing former member from the Socialist and Liberty Party. And I'm sure that the biggest part of the America, they do not know about that. But you receive a lot of news saying that Bolsonaro is a dictatorship, and it's really not that. So that's the importance of CPAC, Verástegui, to come here and have the opportunity to talk with the people about this truth. Because this is not even my opinion. I'm talking about the facts. I'm telling the names of the arrested, the political arrested people that we have in Brazil. So pray for me when I go back to Brazil, because maybe tomorrow can be my turn. I'm laughing, but it's serious, going to the end. If you look, after you have the frauds in Bolivia election last year, what happened, a kind of revolution in Bolivia, and they kicked out the president Evo Morales. All right, Evo Morales ran away to Mexico with one stop in the democratic Cuba. Very good guy. But then after that, the Senator Janine Áñez was the president following the constitution of Bolivia. She stayed there for 8 months. And then she made elections. Who won the elections? the man supported by Evo Morales. Where is Janine Áñez now? She's in the prison. Why? Accused for anti-democratic acts. What is anti-democratic acts? You have no definition in law. And now she is receiving one more accusation, which it is genocide. Anti-democratic acts and genocide is the same narrative that they accuse Jair Bolsonaro. So imagine what will be the future of President Bolsonaro and his family and all of our supporters. Here's Carlos Zambelli, the congressman, my friend in the Congress that will not let him lie. What is our future? So maybe here we are doing a brief of liberty. That's, I think, is the main paper of CPAC.
No, absolutely. Well, what you're saying, obviously we're speaking it here at a conference, but it has very real consequences. This is a term they use in the national security business. This is lawfare. This is when you take laws, you weaponize laws, and you persecute your political opponents using those same laws. That's happening in Brazil. It's happening in Bolivia. Forget about Venezuela and Cuba, Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, they just happening in the United States. And we're going to turn actually to the. I want to turn into a little bit more geopolitics, or should I say geoeconomics, because here in the United States, the big conversation is about China. If we were to go to, let's take South America. Let's take South America. If we were to go back 20 years ago, there's 12 sovereign nations in South America. China was not a top trade partner of anybody, right? 20 years ago. If you go to 2010, China became the top trade partner of 5 of the 12 nations in South America, so they got in the game. By 2020, 2 years ago, China is now the top trade partner of 9 out of the 12 countries in South America, and they're on the verge of capturing the last 3, depending on the elections in some of these countries. So China's taking over. How are we going to solve this problem of China's predatory economic strategies globally, specifically in Latin America? I know, Congressman, you have a specific legislative proposal to deal with this issue, but to deal with it in a way that not just makes it beneficial in terms of trade and geopolitics, but actually benefits the American consumer. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the big problems with China's rapid growth is they needed commodities. And they came to Latin America to extract those commodities, and the demand for those commodities in each Latin American country created a demand for the currency. And as the currencies rose, the price of their own goods became more expensive relative to the price of manufacturing in China. So just what happened in the United States happened in Latin America. So Latin Americans began to buy a lot more Chinese goods, and manufacturing in Latin America decreased. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 that COVID really showed America is that we are completely and overly dependent on China for our manufacturing of some very important things like pharmacologic precursors. So the challenges, those 2 problems, have created a lot of pressure at our southern border. Decreased manufacturing in Latin America has decreased prosperity, and people have come north looking for opportunity. And so we have 3 issues. And how do we fix them in a way that is a conservative solution, not just throwing more taxpayer dollars to the problem? Well, the Development Finance Corporation exists to use private investment dollars to stimulate growth in countries that qualify. So I created a bill that uses development finance money from private investors and buys the rate of the loan down using tariff money from China. So we'll take that money, the investor gets made really whole by their investment return, and the borrowing company who is manufacturing in China gets a super low interest rate to move to Latin America. They move their company to Latin America. They can also borrow for helping the employees understand and employee development and all of that stuff, move their plant, establish their plant, create the economic opportunity in that Latin American country, and it will decouple us from China. It will help the economies of our partners and friends, whom, by the way, there are tens of millions of Latinos and Latinas in America. So you talked about the connection of culture. It's DNA as much as it is values and the other things. But so we'll decouple from China, we'll create opportunity in Latin America, and of course we'll relieve the migration issue pressure on our southern border. And that bill will be dropped in March. And what's really interesting about it is the Democrats like it too. Espiat came to me and said, "Can I take over the bill?" You know, he's like, it's not going to pass, you're a Republican, you know?
I like that.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks, buddy, that's how it works, right? Now, I figured that out on day one. But, you know, the Democrats like the bill, the Republicans like the bill because it's not using taxpayer dollars. So I think this has a chance.
I think you have more than a chance. In the policy wonk world, they call it nearshoring, but I like to call it friendshoring.
Yeah, I like that too, yeah. We may rename it that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of friends in Latin America.
Amen.
So let me go to Hermann, because, you know, I don't think we could have this panel and not talk about what's happening in Ukraine, not talk about Russia. And many people think that that's something that's very far off in another foreign land and maybe has very little to do with what's going on in Latin America or in the Western Hemisphere. I know you know, Hermann, that's not true. You know, you have probably one of the biggest global perspectives that I've ever heard following your work, following your commentary. Can you tell us how the Ukraine conflict that everybody's paying attention to affects us, not just in Latin America, but in the entire Western Hemisphere, and perhaps even just in the world? And how does this impact what can potentially be Russia's encroachment on other Latin American countries besides Venezuela and Cuba?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think we have to understand that the situation, what has been happening now for some months, because I think this has been prepared since months and very openly. So this kind of sanctions should have been really put in place when this was prepared. No, not when the war has started and is in full rage. Full rage now. I think it is quite clear that the war, Putin's war, is a result of weakness, our weakness, of American weakness,
100%.
and of European weakness, and of this hypocrisy in Europe, where we have been since 40 years, and we are relying on America spending the money in the defense, and the Europeans saying that they are having a very nice social security and so on, and the Americans haven't. I mean, it has been so obscene, the resistance to make budgets really secure and safe and normal budgets in Europe for the defense, that you have Spain, it's below, I think it's below 1% what we have in Spain. We have in Spain a prime minister who has a government of enemies of Spain, which is a very peculiar story. It's a socialist, he governs with communists, with separatists, with ex-terrorists. And he's a man who said, just before he came to power, that he wanted to abolish the Ministry of Defense. This kind of people are in place. We have in the presidency of the Commission of Europe, we have von der Leyen, who is a woman who is famous for having almost destroyed the rest of the army in Germany. I mean, she was Minister of Defense of Merkel with catastrophic effects. The prize was to get to go to the presidency of the Commission in the European Union, and it's the government which legislates, because that's the curious story of this kind of socialist project that the European Union today is. I mean, a kind of a unification which gets rid of the sovereignty of the nations and creates a super state, and a super state where people are in charge who you never elected and who you never can call up and ask for responsibilities. This is the process, the weakness that Putin saw. And Putin is reshaping the map. And Putin is not only there for protecting his provinces, Russian-speaking provinces. He wants the whole Ukraine, and then he's going to make a pressure to change all the status of Europe since '89. And the status of Europe since '89 will be massive blackmail on Poland and the Baltics, probably the first intervention against the NATO. And we will see what response you have from here, besides suspending I don't know what kind of commercial stuff and so on, will be to enter from Belarus to Kaliningrad and cut off the contact, the territorial contact between Poland and the Baltic states. We will see what kind of reaction we have there. Any case, Putin wants to change the map, and we have given him hope that he can afford it. And so we are in an enormously dangerous way. But he will open other fronts. The Chinese will probably open Taiwan's front, and Russia can easily open fronts in the backyard of the United States, that means in Latin America. So we are in a global alarm stage, which with absolute open hand.
That's a great point. You're 100% correct. This has been invited by weakness. Weakness invites aggression. Aggression provokes conflict, and conflict often leads to catastrophe. A quick little story before I get to the next question. You know, we were in Colombia. I was on the Colombia-Venezuela border, and what people don't realize is that's the worst border in the Western Hemisphere. As bad as our border is here between Mexico, the Colombia-Venezuela border went from a humanitarian crisis because of the Venezuelan migration to illicit narcotics crisis with all the drugs flowing out from Colombia, Venezuela through narco-terrorist groups, to a straight-out armed conflict where you have mortars, kidnappings, murders, assassinations on a daily basis. They'll kidnap a Colombian police official and in 5 minutes take him across the river, kill him inside Venezuela, and then dump his body inside Colombia. I saw this firsthand. You could watch actually a video on our YouTube channel of Secure Free Society called Border Wars. I highly recommend that you watch that because this is the way all the borders are going to get if these authoritarians continue to take control. Let me have one last question kind of for the entire panel. We'll start with Eduardo, but essentially I think this is the message of CPAC, and this as I interpret it, and I think it's the message of everybody here on the panel. There is not a radical leftist government that has come to power anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, that includes in the United States, without first dividing the right. That is the method. You have to separate the right. You have to put conservatives against conservatives, conservatives against libertarians. They divide and conquer. It's the classic strategy. But I think we know that. And I think what CPAC is doing is unifying people. It's unifying people of different political persuasions. We may not all agree 100% on every single issue, but we have things that we commonly agree on, and we have the same enemies to some degree. So what I want to start with, maybe one last message from the panel, starting with Eduardo, about what we need to greater unification among not just conservatives, but any freedom-loving people in any country, including the Americas, especially the Americas. What do we need to do to bring people together to understand that we are all facing a bigger threat? We're all facing a bigger adversary. Sometimes it's a nation state, other times it's subversive actors. But what do we need to do, and how do we push this message forward? Do we have more people that join the cause?
Well, without a question, CPAC is the answer. And that's why we're bringing CPAC to Mexico. But I'm going to speak from my front. I'm a filmmaker, and media is very important as a platform to use it to bring people together. Why is so important? What I said before. I just finished a documentary called La Otra Parte with an amazing filmmaker named Ricardo Colorado. And we interview hundreds, maybe thousands of teenagers from 12 to 16. And we asked this question in the 32 states of Mexico, very poor areas. What do you want to do when you grow up? Sicario, narco, I want to be part of the cartels. I said, why? Because I don't want to be poor. Because I want to buy a big house to my mother. Because I want to buy a truck. Because I want to have beautiful women. I want to have my gun. Where are you getting all this? Media, soap operas, Netflix, Narcos, Colombia, Narcos, Mexico. You know, they imitate, they have this tendency to imitate what they see. You know, if they spend 9 hours a day watching all this garbage, of course, art has this power to somehow educate, you know, not just young people, even adults. But the young people especially have this tendency, this inclination to imitate what they see. And so how can we bring people together? Well, we do occupy many spaces in media, in politics, in everywhere, in sports. The most important decisions that are made in a country are made by politicians. I started by saying I'm not a politician. Doesn't mean that I'm not involved in politics. We should all be involved in politics. Why? Because those decisions affect our lives. It changes the destiny of a country, for good or for bad. One thing that can bring us together as well is, for example, fighting for freedom. Freedom has many layers. What is the number one problem right now that we have in the world? It's not drugs. Yes, it's a big problem. But one thing that is surpassing the drug business, it's human trafficking, child trafficking. Sadly, I'm not sure of this, but yes, it's a global problem, especially US and Mexico. US is the number one consumer of child sex in the world. Mexico, sadly, the number one provider. What are we going to do to end this horrible crime? Not only security the borders, because, you know, remember back in the days when, oh, poor parents, they're separating from their children. Most of them were traffickers. Traffickers. Right now, how long have we been here? 1 hour? Almost an hour? 6 children disappear in Mexico in this hour. 6. Are going to be destined to child pornography, child trafficking for sexual exploitation, and organs traffic. And it's growing and growing and growing because of child pornography. It's creating an addiction in people. So this is one thing that when I tell people about, you know, let's come together to end child trafficking, even those who are in the other side, because they have children, they say, in this fight, Eduardo, grab my hand. So this is an opportunity to fight for something that is, in my opinion, the worst crime on earth. But at the same time, we're coming together to end this terrible crime. And I'm convinced that through a bilateral effort or multilateral effort, all Latin America, United States together, we can end this terrible crime. So the movie's coming out this year. It's called Sound of Freedom. It's a true story about an American hero named Tim Butter, and he travels around the world, risking his life, his family, and everything to save children. He has saved thousands of children, but he told me, I'm not the solution, Eduardo. I'm the solution for 1 kid, for 2, for 1,000. There's millions of children kidnapped every year for sexual exploitation. So it's only through a movement that we can end this nightmare. So I invite you to see the trailers. Sound of Freedom is on YouTube, it's free. The movie will come out in September. And please tell everyone that you know to go and see this film, so together we can end this horrible nightmare, child trafficking.
Absolutely. Eduardo might not be a politician, but you have a vision. You're certainly a leader, and thank you for leading Mexico in a direction that's getting away from some of the failed policies of the past. Thank you. Eduardo, what do we need to do? I know Brazil has a lot of challenges. We have an important election. Probably the most important election in the Western Hemisphere is in Brazil in October. What do we need to do to bring everybody together to understand that the bigger threat here is a twice convicted felon could return to power and probably would destroy that country in ways that we don't even imagine?
My friend Eduardo told here about the perspective from an actor view, and you are right. There is a research, I don't know the name in English, a series from Netflix, help me Paulo, Gambito da Rainha. It's a chess game.
Queen's Gambit, I guess.
Queen's Gambit, yeah. After that, the search on Google about how to play chess is double-sided. Like the amount of sellings from Amazon to the chess game is like more than 100% more after this. And it shows a lot about the power of the media, of a Netflix, of a program about that. If they are doing that with your mind, we can do the same to show what kind of society that we have, that we want. And from the political perspective, the first thing that I say is, usually, at least in Brazil, you have a lot of conservative candidates. and they think that you have a limited amount of votes. So, if I start to criticize my conservative friend candidate, maybe I can have their votes to me. This is very wrong. For example, I got almost 2 million votes in São Paulo state, and no one would think that someone would receive that amount of votes, because the last record, it was a representative that received 1.5 million. So we have to increase the number of the voters, not stealing the votes of other conservative candidates, but getting the votes from the left-wing candidates, because they are the real threat. If we agree in 70 or maybe 80% of the issues, we don't have to attack each other because all the rest of the 20% of the issues. We have to tell the truth about the real threat, and the real threat is on the left. You said very well, Lula da Silva, the former president, he's not, there is a fake news that the members of the Liberals Party, they tell all around the world, saying that Lula got absolved. That's a lie. He was convicted, he's guilty in 2 trials. And he only can be candidate because in the Supreme Court, where you have 11 justices, 8 were appointed by the Labour Party when Lula was president, or Dilma Rousseff. So it was a juridic trick that they made to get back again from the zero all of the trials. It's not that he's absolved, he's still guilty, but the process is starting again from the zero. And we do not have time enough to have a condemnation until October, when we will have the elections in Brazil. So let me make it clear about that. And he has a bunch of other trials coming up. But the good news is, if we defeat Lula now in this election, it will take at least 10 years for the left to build other Lula da Silva. It will be 10 or 15 years of prosperity in Brazil. I can tell you. Because next year, the next president of Brazil, he will appoint 2 more justices for the Supreme Court. And then the things start to change. President Bolsonaro already appointed 2. And if he gets reelected, he will appoint 2 more. So with 4 in the Supreme Court, things will start to change. And we will have force enough to block some justices that want to arrest journalists because they do not like what they are writing or saying. Maybe we will have force enough to stop a justice if he wants to arrest a representative as me or as Carla Zambelli because what we are saying. Can you imagine that? You are arresting someone, a congressman, because you do not like the criticism that he's doing about the court where you work. Why did you not change the court and be happy like going to restaurants, going to the middle of the crowd? No, they want to arrest, they want to use, to control because they are progressists. They say openly, some of them, that they are progressists. So they want to control the society. And they want to bring to the society the perfect society that they have in mind. So they have to control everything. And we have to show them that they are wrong.
Very good. Well, we're going to all supporting President Bolsonaro's re-election to be the president once again in Brazil. To round out the panel, first I'm going to go with Hermann, because Hermann, Vox, Foro Madrid, Fundación Disenso, Spain, you guys are leading the way of making sure that Latin America doesn't separate itself from within. Tell us, what else do we need to do to be able to make sure that we unify against a tidal wave of not just leftists, but also authoritarian leftists that are coming on the way in Latin America?
Thank you. The thing is, Eduardo Bolsonaro is perfectly right. I mean, we have to unite in the main issues because we have in front of us a reconquista. Reconquista is reconquer. We Spaniards are specialists in reconquista. we were invaded 711. We were invaded by the Muslims, by the Arabs. They came just up to the north, and in the just years later, it started the Reconquista. And the Reconquista took 700 years. But it was done. It was tough. So we have a Reconquista. We have lost 50 years. Since the 60s, we are retreating. The conservatives are retreating since the 60s in Europe and in the whole Western world. We have a Reconquista to do against all this kind of bulldozer that we have, which is the totalitarian mind that they are distributing. In schools, we have to reconquer schools. We have to reconquer the public space. We have to reconquer the cinema. We have to reconquer culture. We have to reconquer the universities, which are, or to reconquer or to close, some of them. We have to reconquer all the pillars of a society which we gave without a fight. And now we have to fight with double intensity. But we are doing it. I mean, in Spain, there was no hope 6 years ago. And now there is not only a hope, there's enormous a movement with Vox that we are changing, that we don't have to have a resignation, to have this kind of to resign, to accept that there is a system where two parties which almost want the same and deliver the same, play one day one term the other, and they do practically the same, because nobody wants to get out of the framework of the progressive and of the mainstream, and so on. No, we are outside the mainstream, and we are very proud of being outside, and we're very proud of being insulted and attacked and completely defamated, completely systematically insulted and defamated by the media and so on. And even so, every time there are more people who come to us, and we are breaking that. And there will be a moment where we have media, and there will be a moment where the other media, the left-wing media, the media who are protecting criminals, because we are not confronting only normal politicians who disagree with us. We are confronting a criminal structure which wants to cover all up, who wants complete power and wants to suppress all our freedom and all our rights. This we have to take it in mind, to have it always in mind. It's not a common rival, it's an enemy, it's an enemy, it's an existential enemy what we are fighting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, to wrap this up, we have other elections that are also important, and not just in Latin America, but right here in the United States. We have a midterm election, and as we've learned with the last presidential election in the United States, elections do indeed have consequences. What will a Republican majority, a Republican-led Senate, a Republican-led House of Representatives do, Congressman Green, to build Latin America back as one of our top priorities for foreign policy?
Well, let me first say that, sort of, if I could answer a little bit of your last question. If we want to advance freedom throughout the world, whether it's in Latin America or at home, Republicans must take control of the House in 2022. There is no other target that is any closer or more important. It has to happen. And then we have to take the White House in 2024, period. So if you're asking yourself what task is on your plate, if you're an American, your number one task is to help us retake the House. Number two, the White House. What will Republican leadership look like? We already have 7 task forces that have been formed to write the legislation, the freedom legislation, the free market legislation, the free enterprise legislation, the strong U.S. military legislation, because as you said, and as members of NATO said when I visited NATO en route to Kyiv just a few weeks ago, we are here where we are in Ukraine today because of weakness in August. The failed withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan. American leadership allowing American citizens to be left behind is a stain on the country. And that weakness was provocative, and it provoked Vladimir Putin. So, again, we got to get them out of office. We've got to take this legislation. We got to build up our military might and our alliances. And sitting right here, you know, a member of the legislative branch of the fourth largest economy in the world, Brazil, who has a 100-ship deep water navy. An alliance with us allows the U.S. to pivot more to Asia if Brazil's covering the South Atlantic. So it's freedom at home, it's the right people leading, it's a strong military, it's alliances and friendships with people that create strength for freedom all over the globe. That's what you'll get when we're back in power.
Thank you, Congressman, and I'm very optimistic. I think that, you know, this is one of the things that the left has done in Latin America is they've taken advantage of a complacency that people just didn't realize that this was happening right before our eyes. They didn't realize that Maduro was going to be worse than Hugo Chavez, an extension of Cuba. They didn't realize that Evo Morales in Bolivia was going to return. Again, Daniel Ortega was going to essentially prosecute and jail his entire political opposition. We're seeing this happening, but the reason I'm confident that CPAC will save Latin America, the reason I'm confident that CPAC will save Latin America is because of all of you. I'm confident because of all of you. There's a new generation of leadership that's emerging in Latin America. Begins with Eduardo Bolsonaro in Brazil, begins with Eduardo's and his civil society movements in Mexico, Hermann Tertsch leading the way in Spain, and Congressman Mark Green being one of our leaders inside the U.S. Congress to make sure Latin America does not become the lost region of foreign policy, and especially because of all of you for joining us today. And like I said, next year, we'll be on the main stage, and we'll be talking about Latin America as #1 region of U.S. foreign policy. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you all.